Greetings, friends, and welcome to the Secrets of a Witch podcast with me, Sabrina Scott, where I talk all about life, love, healing, spirituality, witchcraft, tarot, mediumship, feminine energy, and everything in between. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for listening. And if you are listening as I am releasing this episode live, happy Monday, happy week. I will be coming back to Instagram on a Wednesday. So say hello to me to welcome me back on there if you're an Instagram person. Of course, my Instagram is Sabrina M. Scott. And so anyway, let's just launch right into it. Today's topic is about 5 reasons to focus on specifically the spiritual before you focus on the magical. And maybe you've been focusing on the magical for quite some time. Maybe you've been noticing that your magical practice hasn't quite been landing, or maybe your rituals kind of don't get you the results that you want. And you might be wondering, why is that? Why am I not getting the magical results that I want? Why do all my spells flop? Why do I feel spiritually disconnected, etc., etc., etc.? I've heard this and I've seen this from so many people over the years. And so let's leave magic and witchcraft aside today. Let's put it on the shelf. Let's look at it, admire its prettiness, and then just leave it there for the time being. And today, focus on the spiritual. And so today I've got for you 5 reasons why diving into your spirituality before you focus on the magic, or if you have been focusing on the magic, 5 reasons why you should refocus, restart, dive back into spirituality specifically. Okay? Let's go. Reason number 1 is that once you decide what you believe, why you believe it, and how those beliefs influence your life, all of the how and the why of magic falls into place. Because oftentimes people will dive into magic and they'll do spells, they'll do rituals, they'll be calling on this spirit, this divinity, that land spirit that they've never heard of before but read in a book. And then they'll do all the stuff and then the magic will not work and people will be like, why? And part of the reason for that, I think, is this, right? It's that a lot of the time folks don't take that time to reflect and really take that time feeling and thinking into what exactly it is that you specifically believe. You yourself, right? Not me, not anyone else on the internet, not the person who wrote the book that you're reading. You, the unique individual with your unique background, your unique story about all the places that you've lived in, your history in your life, some of the things that you had control over and some things that you haven't had control over. Maybe you have a multicultural background. Maybe you've lived in a lot of different countries. And all of that has probably influenced your belief systems in some way. Maybe you're queer, maybe you're straight, maybe you're whatever, maybe you're disabled. There's so many different ways that, and I know I just did an episode about identity is boring. Like, yes, it is, I know. But that being said, like, if we do lean into reflecting on our identity, who we are, where we've been, where we've come from, and where we're going, we can sometimes extrapolate some information from all of that to make sense of beliefs that we have that we maybe didn't really take the time to realize that we have. Like those beliefs that are kind of embedded in our being unintentionally, just due to culture or due to location or any of that. But I do think it's so powerful and so important to actually take a moment and figure out, what the fuck do I believe? Why do I believe that? You know? So for myself, I'm an animist. I believe that all that exists, every material thing that exists, has energy, has a spirit, has a soul, and that includes my curtains. It includes my weekly planner. It includes my bedspread. It includes the water bottle that's right in front of me. It includes the phone I am speaking into right now. It includes the sunflowers on my shelf. It includes the candle burning on my altar. Actually, 3 candles on my altar right now. It includes the 3 cats that are somewhere in my apartment. It includes the ancestors that walk with me. It includes the saints that I work with. It includes the land upon which I live. All of this to me has energy, has spirit, has soul. And because of that, that is going to influence how I do magic, how I believe magic works. And also it's going to influence how do I work with and interface with the objects, spirits, beings, energies, etc. that I'm doing magic with. Right? Because if someone is not an animist, that is going to mean that the way that they do magic, the way that they approach magic is going to be really, really different than the way that I approach it. If someone is, let's say, a Christian who is not an animist, that is also going to mean that the way that they do magic is going to be different from the way that I do it. And all these different ways of doing magic are fine. But if let's say someone is an animist and then read a book about Christian witchcraft, they might need to switch around some things so that it makes sense with what their own beliefs are. And then vice versa. And so I do think it is so important to get clear about what you believe, because once you know what it is that you believe and why and how you believe the energy in the world works, if you believe in energy, if you believe in gods, if you believe in the holiness of the earth and the water and the clouds and all of that is information that you can use to work with your magic. If you don't know where you're at with any of that, then your magic is probably going to end up being kind of confused and convoluted. And the universe and the spirits are going to be like, what's going on? Like, they're going to be like, who is this person talking to? What do they believe? Like, we're confused. Is she talking to me? Is she talking to that spirit over there? Like, we don't know. And so everything will probably not really fully work, especially if you're not clear with yourself on what you believe and why, and how you believe magic works and why, and what spiritual beings and objects you're working with and why. If you don't know any of that stuff, your magic is going to flop. And so going back to that focus on the spiritual, deciding what the fuck you believe, how and why, etc., that is going to be hugely important in you figuring out what your magic is, because it's the foundation of everything. So 2, if you focus on the spiritual first, let's say, or you dive back into it now, no matter what point in your practice you are at, you will then know which spiritual beings to lean into and create relationships with. You'll know who to ask to boost your magic. You'll know who to ask to protect you and help you when you're in a time of need. And so this is part of what bothers me about a lot of the witchy books that are out there, right? Where it's like, you're doing a love spell, go talk to Freya or Aphrodite. And it's like, but what if the person is not giving a single shit about Norse or like Greco-Roman pantheons? Like, what if the person doesn't believe in gods or goddesses at all? Like, then, like, what if the person is working with, I don't know, like a Celtic pantheon of deities or an Egyptian pantheon of deities, asking them to randomly call upon Freya in this like witchy 101 spell book? Like, that is just really not gonna work with what that person's beliefs are. And so when we have this like hodgepodge, random, paint by numbers way of working our magic, it usually is not going to work, because that belief, that cosmology is not there to boost it, right? So when you know what you believe, like when you've decided, you know what, I'm going to work with beings from this particular pantheon because that's my heritage, or because I live there and I really resonate with it, or you know what, I just really resonate with it and it feels really right to me. And then you say, okay, I'm also going to work with my ancestral spirits. Then you've got something concrete to build upon. You know who you're asking for help. You know who you're giving offerings to. You know who you're trying to connect with when you're doing your meditating, or when you're lighting a candle, or when you're doing your prayers. You have a specific group of spiritual beings that you are chatting with, getting to know, making friends with, being devoted to, etc. And so when you create space for that specificity in your practice, when you decide that you're going to cut off certain beings. Like when you decide, you know what, I don't give a shit about gods or goddesses, I'm just going to work with saints. Or when you say the opposite, when you're like, you know what, I really love the Egyptian pantheon, and so I'm not going to work with any of these like Greco-Roman spirits. That's just not for me. Then you become freer to go deeper. And it's kind of like making art, right? Like sometimes people have a really hard time making art. Like I remember when I was a university professor, I taught illustration. I remember when I gave my students at the end of the term a wide open assignment of like, just paint whatever the fuck you want. Do anything. Do what makes your heart sing. That's actually the assignment that students had the hardest time with, because they didn't really know what to do without specific instructions or without those specific requirements, let's say, or specific confines. And so it can actually be easier to be more free when we do have some more confines in our practice. And I think when you do know what spiritual beings you're interested in creating relationships with, then you'll know who to talk to, who to ask for support, who to give offerings to, who to connect with, etc. in your magical practice as well, because that spiritual relationship will be stronger because you've committed to it, right? So it's easier to make better friends when we're devoting more time to those friends, rather than meeting with 20 different people once in a while. So that is absolutely an important thing with all of this. Number 3, when you focus on your specific cosmology, your specific spiritual beliefs, and your own specific spiritual beings that you want to work with, you're way less likely to be pulled into magical fads that have absolutely nothing to do with you. Right? There's been so many fads in the spiritual and witchy corners of social media, and I don't think I need to explain this to you guys, but they're just honestly so all over the place. Like I remember there was one where everyone was talking about witch bottles, and there's another one where everyone was talking about mojo bags. Like everyone was doing those candles that are like so covered with herbs that they're gonna literally set your house on fire. Like it's just endless. And a lot of those fads are just fads. You know, like some of that stuff is from hoodoo. And if you are not practicing hoodoo, then like, why are you doing that? It just doesn't make much sense to me. Right? And there's certain ways of working that can be incorporated into what you're doing and your own belief system and your own cosmology. But when something is just the sexy fad, the magic fad, the witch fad on social media of the week, people get so distracted by this that they neglect what actually feels right to them in their practice, right? So even if like witch bottles or whatever the fuck is the sexy thing on Instagram right now, maybe you don't give a shit about that. Maybe you only want to do bath magic. Maybe you only want to do cooking magic. Maybe you only want to do candle magic, and that's how you work, period. Right? Maybe you just want to do visualizing. Maybe you don't give a shit about witch bottles. Maybe you don't give a shit about mojo bags or bags of herbs. Maybe you don't care about any of that. And I think once we dial into our spirituality, our cosmology, our belief system, what we are focusing on in our magic can just become a lot more personal to us. And we're less likely to be pulled into and sucked into and distracted by those magical fads that aren't really relevant to your practice, and it's not going to elevate your practice, and it's also not going to elevate your relationship to yourself or your spiritual team, right? Magical fads are the death of like a lot of people's spiritual practice, right? Like it's so easy for people to run around like a chicken without their head, just being distracted by all this stuff that, you know, they might think that, oh, I saw this on Instagram is what it takes to become a real witch. But it's like, if that is not something that resonates with you, don't do it. Just because everyone else on Instagram is doing it doesn't mean that you need to do it too. And when you're feeling strong in your spirituality, your cosmology, your belief system, and your relationships with the spiritual beings that you are working with, that you are emphasizing in your own life, those fads totally, it's easier to ignore them because you can see them for what they are, which is a fad. And maybe you learn something in a fad that you're like, oh, I do want to incorporate this part of my practice, and that's totally cool. And then it'll have staying power, and that's cool. But you do not need to have a fad-based spiritual practice. Like, spirituality is actually not about fads at all. Like, I've been doing my spiritual practice, like, since I was like 8. And it's looked very, very similar pretty much the whole time. Obviously, I've become more advanced in what I do, but my belief system, my cosmology, has remained literally the exact same since I was 8. Right? And that's because, like, I did a lot of time thinking about what the fuck do I believe. I was a very weird 8-year-old. I spent all my time doing this religious, philosophical, spiritual reflection and deciding, what do I believe and why? Right? And so if you haven't done that, it's so important. And that's why, like, if you look back on my Instagram to 10 years ago, my practice pretty much looks the same. And you can see that my practice has not been influenced by fads. You can look back if you want to. Like, it's been the same this whole time. And that's because I got clear on my belief system, on my cosmology, and I've remained firm in that. And there's nothing wrong with changing your cosmology once you get new or more information. That's okay. But I've been so deep in this work in a really intense way for so long that I figured my cosmological system out earlier than most people, and that's okay. But that's also why my practice has been so consistent. And so if you want your practice to be consistent, if you want your magic to work, if you want your spiritual relationships to be strengthened, if you don't want to be distracted by these fads, these magical fads about this or that are just going to distract you from who you are, it is so important to just spend that time to get clear on your cosmology, your spirituality. What do you believe and why? And so piggybacking off of this, I'm going to go to reason number 4. When you know who you are spiritually, you're also less easily distracted by other people's practices, right? So when you know who you are spiritually, when you know what you believe spiritually, you're not going to be thrown off by someone who believes something different than you, or you're not going to be thrown off and distracted by someone on Instagram or social media or in your community who is practicing some kind of way. You're going to be like, good for them, that's awesome, and I'm going to go do my thing, which is different. Right? You're less distracted by stuff that is not for you. You're less insecure and triggered by that stuff that is other people's work. Right? Because you will know who you are, what you believe, and why. And those relationships with those spirits, with those beings, with the earth, with yourself, will be so much stronger and deeper. Reason number 5. Once you do all of this stuff, focus on the spiritual. You'll feel freer to dive into your own roots, your own earthy beginnings of your family. Maybe that's blood family, maybe that's adopted family, maybe that is like cultural or like subgroup family, like maybe you're queer or trans, and those queer and trans roots in your community or in your country is something that you want to bring into your practice and your magic. I love that. I think that's fucking awesome. And when you focus on your own spirituality, your own beliefs, what's important to you, your own spiritual values, it's easier to make space for and embrace your own roots, your own interests, no matter what they are and no matter how fringe or how mainstream they are, right? Because talking about the trends and the fads and worrying about what other people are doing, it can be so distracting, right? Like I've seen some people on witchy Instagram say, oh, well, this type of witchcraft is so mainstream, and so I want to be cool, and so I'm not going to do that. Or even the opposite, right? It's like, I've seen all of these different things. And so it's easier to dive into your own roots and not be distracted by anyone else's roots, however which way you want to interpret that, when you've got a pretty good handle on what you believe. And it's okay to take some time to work this out. Like, it's not stuff that most people are going to figure out overnight. But the point of focusing on the spiritual, focusing on the belief, focusing on the cosmology, focusing on the spiritual relationships, is that all of these magical symbols, all of these ways of working with magic become so much more potent and become so much more personal and unique and specifically tailored to you, who you are, your energy, and what you believe. Because as we all know, a big part of what fuels magic is energy and belief. And if you are wavering or unsure in your belief, the magic will likely not work quite as well. And when all of this is tailor-made specifically for you, everything else, magic, witchcraft, etc., falls into place with so much more ease. Because you're not trying to be someone that you're not. And you're not trying to force yourself into a pretzel to be acceptable to the mainstream witchcraft community on Instagram or wherever. And so when we take that step back to go into the spiritual, that is where the magic really begins. So I hope I've convinced you guys. So I think a lot of people do want to focus on the magic without doing the spiritual work first, which is why in my Magic Without Bullshit course, I do talk about the spiritual component first and foremost. And if anyone is interested in joining up on that, send me an email, ceo@sabrinamscott.com. But if you're interested in a smaller experience focusing on spiritual, I'm going to be running a really fun group texting experience called Spiritual September. You can learn more about it at sabrinamscott.com/sept, SEPT. It's going to be 1 month of the most fun group chat ever, where I will give you guys a prompt, an activity, a provocation, an invitation every single day relating to spirituality, cosmology, and belief to get the conversation rolling. And if you are someone who feels alienated or alone in your spirituality, if you're someone who has focused more on magic than on the spiritual, this experience is 100% for you, whether you're an expert and have been in the community for a decade, or whether you are just a baby magician, a baby witch. Maybe you are very new to thinking about your spirituality. This experience is 100% for you. I hope to see you there. So it is Spiritual September. I think it is $97 for the month. It's going to be super fucking fun. sabrinamscott.com/sept. And I hope to see you there. Any questions, let me know. And I'll catch you guys on the flip side. Bye.